So, good evening, everyone, for another round of Curiosity Talks brought to you by WisdomCircle. Those of you who don't know, this is an offering in the bouquet of other offerings that WisdomCircle has, where we try to host sessions curated for all of you, and we bring wisdom from the wise to the curious. So, I'm happy that all of you are here. Our speaker for today is author Adhirath Sethi. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him because his CV has so much more, and I let him speak about himself. He's a writer whose work spans the genres of fiction, satire, crime thrillers, psychological thrillers, dark comedy, and yes, even romance. He's a former management consultant with the Boston Consulting Group. He took an all too eager plunge into entrepreneurship in 2008 and took to writing as a way to keep sane during that time. The Moving of Mountains, his fourth book, has been praised by thought leaders, policymakers, and captains of industry for its gripping and inspirational narrative of the Agastya International Foundation's incredible journey of discovery, exploration, and innovation that has transformed education in India at the grassroots level. He's an alumnus of the Rishi Valley School, Eton College, and the London School of Economics. Welcome, Adhirath. So before we begin on the Agastya story, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Well, I think you captured most of it. I know you promised there was more, but to be honest, that was the crux of it. And yes, I was with BCG until about 2007, 2008. I left to join my family business here in Bangalore. And fortuitously, or unfortunately, whichever way you look at it, the timing kind of coincided with the financial crisis. And so I was left with a lot of time and not necessarily a lot of bandwidth to move around. So I was required to be at my plant, at my factory where we do our business, but there wasn't a lot going on. So I ended up writing as a way to keep busy so that I could be on call and get up at a moment's notice and go into the plant if needed. And that became my first book. And feeling that, yes, this is something I really enjoy, I continued doing it. Agastya's story came to me in about 2019. I've been with the foundation, of course, since the very beginning, and I joined the board in 2010. And so there was an idea that we would capture the story of Agastya in 2019 when the foundation had completed about 2 decades. Of course, COVID came along and complicated things quite a lot, so we put it on the back burner. And then in 2022, the suggestion was again brought up that maybe we should do this. So the idea was to have a repository of insights, learnings, anecdotes, basically just perspectives of folks that have helped Agastya along its way and brought it to where it is today. And the idea was if we could put that in a narrative that was compelling, then that's a story that we thought would be worth telling. So I put my hand up at that time. Being an author, I said it might be a good experience for me. And it took about 2 years to complete the book. And in that time, there was a lot that I learned about Agastya from speaking with over 100 people that we earmarked for interviews across the spectrum, instructors, or as we call them in Agastya, ignators, staff members, management, donors, thought leaders, and advisors to Agastya over the years. And it all came together, I think, in a way that the story for me there was a lot that I learned about Agastya while I was doing all of this. And I hope I've done a good job in weaving it all together and making a narrative that I expect someone might read and find compelling.
So I think what I'll do, Adhirath, now is I'll share some images so that you can take us along that journey with the help of these pictures and people can connect. Yeah, so tell us how the name Agastya was chosen.
Agastya was named after the sage, the Maharishi Agastya, who is both a mythological figure as well as a figure that that occurs in history. So in history, he's considered to have been a great scholar and someone that spread education across the Indian subcontinent, which was something that his namesake, the foundation, was trying to do as well. So it seemed to tie in well with their mission. But in mythology, one of the most famous stories of Agastya was that he was traveling from the north to the south of India. And the Vindhya mountains at this time were growing almost unchecked and would have possibly surpassed the Himalayas had Agastya not come along. And trying to cross over to the south, Agastya found that his way was blocked. And so he requested the Vindhyas, being a Maharishi and having that kind of power, he was able to do this. He requested the Vindhyas to bend low so he could pass over. And a few things happened because of this. One is, of course, he made the Vindhyas promise he would not, that it wouldn't grow again until he passed north again. And being quite cheeky, or I'm not sure if he knew or didn't know, but he had no intention of ever going north. And that kept the Vindhyas subdued. And this had the result of keeping north and south of India fairly accessible to one another and keeping the subcontinent as one unified landmass. And so, in a sense, that was again what Agastya, the foundation, was trying to do in terms of having a unifying vision and taking that vision across to all the states in India. And so, Agastya's name, one of the meanings of his name was he who moves mountains. And so, we saw the challenge of changing the fabric or changing the tone of Indian education as something quite Herculean and akin to moving of mountains, moving a mountain, you could say. And it tied in quite well with the sage's name, and that's how the book got its name as a result.
Yeah, that's really nice. Great to hear that story. And then how did these three visionaries come together and imagine this vision of an evolving education system for children and teachers in rural India? Something that had not been seen before.
So I wouldn't say not been seen. I mean, Indian education was historically a very hands-on, interactive. If you look at the Gurukul system, for example, it was basically
Right,
that you lived and
right,
breathed the subject you were learning. It wasn't restricted to a textbook. Somewhere along the way, and you could probably maybe blame the British for this, but a Lancastrian model was adopted, and that was more a factory model of rote learning, of making kids memorize facts and then going on to spew them on an exam paper. And we've all been there, I think, regardless of how privileged we've been in education. Exams in India were, in fact, something that you, as we said, you mugged up and then you went in and you had to say certain phrases, you had to use certain lines, you had to give a certain number of steps when you did maths, otherwise the examiner wouldn't give you all the marks. It was very rigid in that sense. The founders, not three, I would say, the five founders,
okay,
and only one of them, Dr. Balasundaram, had an education in his background, being the principal of Rishi Valley School. The others were Dr. P.K. Iyengar, who was a nuclear scientist and head of the Homi Bhabha Atomic Energy Commission. K.V. Raghavan, who was a captain of industry and who was headed many large companies across India during the time when it was really growing. And of course, Mahavir Kataria, who was a stockbroker and also had some experience in manufacturing. And then there was Ramji, who was a financier, who was a banker based in London. And it was his, you could say, dissatisfaction with with what he was doing, which kind of was the spark that allowed Agastya to start. So Ramji was in London, he was based there, he was happy to be doing what he was doing, but at some point felt very disgruntled with the way things were, and had always wanted to do something in education and effectively quit lock, stock, and barrel and said, I'm coming to India and I'll figure out what it is that I need to do when I'm there. So he spent quite a long time interviewing people, meeting folks in the education space to understand what it was that was lacking in Indian education. And when the five of them eventually came together to start Agastya, they had this vision that creativity, curiosity, and innovative thinking were the three things that somehow had been stripped away from a child's educative journey somewhere along the way. And putting that back in, even if it meant at a grassroots level, would almost certainly yield some kind of dividends later on in the child's life. And so Agastya was built around that vision,
right,
the
right.
three pillars being creativity, curiosity, and innovation. And then, interesting enough, as Agastya evolved, we added two more pillars, which is caring and confidence. So having the intellect or having the tools to think through problems also having the empathy to apply those problems in a way that helps another person. And equally important, especially for children, disadvantaged children in India, having the ability to turn that kind of thinking inward and lift yourself out of your own circumstance and having the confidence to make those decisions and say that, yes, I've been given the tools to think through my problems and I'm going to now apply them to my life. And that we've seen time and time again with Agastya, numerous anecdotes of, even though we say we are a science learning platform, but the application of that kind of thinking into the lives of these students and how they manage to apply it and in many cases come out of a very, very dire circumstance and live to tell the tale and come back to say, yes, it was Agastya's thinking that allowed me to do this.
So the basic Agastya model is the 4C model, is it?
It is the 4C model. And for folks that aren't aware of how we distribute the content, Agastya is not really a school. It is rather a mobile delivery mechanism. So we have a hub and spoke model. We have a campus in Kuppam in Andhra Pradesh, where a lot of the ideation, a lot of the models, a lot of the thinking behind the pedagogy are kind of are done over there. And then we have science centers peppered across the country. And these science centers act as watering holes for mobile vans, which come to the science center, stock up on experiments like the ones you're seeing on your screen, low cost, hands on models that give children the practical glimpse into the science that otherwise they're only learning in their textbooks. So a child that has been told, okay, this is a paragraph and you have to memorize it. It's about how the earth spins around the sun, is now suddenly seeing a solar system in action and is able to actually move the planets around and say, wow, okay, I get it now. It was not clear to me from the words, but this really complements what I know. So Agastya takes time with the government schools in 2 hour slots and it visits the schools. It typically will engage with a class of a certain age group. So we typically work with from the fifth standard to the ninth standard. And so on a given day, you might say a classroom full of, say, fifth standard students. And so we try and link what we're taking to them on that particular day with what it is that they're learning as part of their syllabus. So it gives them a much more an enriching kind of experience compared to a dreary day in the classroom, which I think a lot of us would say is a much better alternative. Um, and so we have mobile vans which move across the country. We have labs on bikes, which kind of go slightly deeper into rural India. And then we have what we call a lab in the box, wherein an instructor will take a box full of experiments literally by hand, use the public transport system, and try and reach those really small schools where 5, 10 kids at most are maybe learning. Because, as we like to say, we try and reach the child who cannot be reached because you never know where inspiration is going to strike. You never know where the spark of curiosity is going to actually ignite someone's love and passion for learning. And so we try and do as much as we can to get into those areas and deliver science at those points. And of course, as the foundation evolved, the learning methods and the methods of dissemination themselves started to evolve. So science fairs started becoming a big thing, drawing huge crowds. At one time, 40,000 children were coming to their science fairs. And the interesting thing here was there was a lot of peer-to-peer learning happening. So children were trained to use the experiments and then teach their peers how these things worked. And that, again, gives you a huge boost, both in terms of the confidence of the child, as well as the absorption they themselves have in terms of the content that they're transmitting. And then, of course, at some point, we found that a Agastya student, a girl that had gone through the Agastya system and had now graduated, was in her village on her own without any prompting, had started to teach kids in the evenings and give them, and basically using Agastya's methods and models, trying to make her own models. And it was very useful because they were kids whose parents were still in the field. They were otherwise probably going to get up to some kind of mischief. So for them, it was very nice to have this grown up who's gone through college and come back teaching them stuff. And so Ramji was happened to be in a village where this girl was doing this, and he asked her, "What is your name?" And she said her name was Vasanta. And so we decided to launch what we call Operation Vasanta, which eventually is a night school concept wherein we give a small stipend to the instructor. And since they've come through the Agastya system, they have a very strong connect with how Agastya does things. And it's wonderful. It's about 600 villages in India at its peak. And it gave Agastya the confidence itself to say that, yes, what we're doing may actually result in a lot of self-starters doing this on their own, which is something we
Yes,
love.
yes,
And it was always about how do we go from a science learning platform to a movement. It's not
right.
just about what we're teaching, it is about understanding that this kind of learning and this kind of method would be useful to any child anywhere. And if that can have its own momentum and spread of its own accord, even without Agastya's intervention, that we'll take that. That'll be a great testimony to what we've done and what we've established.
That's absolutely wonderful to hear the story of how she's setting up classes and teaching the kids herself. Wonderful, wonderful. I've noticed in these pictures, Adhirath, that the kids are smiling all the time. So uh, I think they seem to enjoy, the lessons they learn. I just picked up on these pictures, and the smiles are so wonderful.
It's a very dangerous thing to accompany someone like Ramji, for example, or even Sai, who heads Agastya's, who's now our COO, into a
Yeah.
classroom, because you get almost intoxicated by this feeling that you're a rock star, because you enter and there's just loud cheer that goes up, and the kids are
Yeah.
just delirious and they're so happy that they're getting this interaction.
Right.
And it can really fool you into thinking that it's for you, but really it's for the science, it's for the content that Agastya gives. And
Yeah.
Ramji tells of this story that he met a group of kids and he said, "Listen, I what if I just sent all the experiments to your school? Would you still want Agastya to come?" And this
Hmm.
girl put her hand up and said, "Yes, yes, of course we would." And he said, "No, no, I'll give you the experiments. I'll set up a science center in your school, for example, a little lab. You can go there and
Hmm.
play with all the experiments. Would you still want the Agastya instructors to come?" And she said, "No, we'd still want you to come." He said, "No, no, no, then I'll train your teachers. We'll do everything.
Okay.
Would you still want?" And she said, "Yes, we still want it." They said, "But why?" And she said, "Sir, because the
Yeah.
Agastya instructor treats us like a friend." So we've done, I think, one of the most remarkable things that Agastya has done is
Yeah.
what we have is this TQM, this total quality management, wherein we have defined how a healthy interactive session should be organized. And it
Mm-hmm.
works. The crude example I use, of course, is the fast food industry, which unfortunately makes it all seem a lot less, um, grand and wonderful. But the way that the fast food industry maps itself and creates a system whereby the quality and the process and everything is very defined so that you can quickly scale up and go across the country. Agastya has kind of done it, but in a more human and a more uh, kind of compassionate way, you could say, but with education. So defining how a class should be structured. Initially, we'd find instructors speak for 10, 15 minutes on Agastya. Right. So we said, well, you have 2 hours. You can't waste 15, 20 minutes talking just about this. So you got to
Okay.
finish your Agastya introduction in about 2.5 minutes. And then
Hmm.
what do you do? How much time do you spend interacting? How much time do you then give for questions to come back to you? How much time do you give for kids to just have fun and be maybe a little goofy with the experiments and fool around with them? So all of that was defined over years, I would say, of iteration.
Okay.
And it has allowed Agastya to then spread and map its philosophy and map its methods across the country, even though we're operating here in Bangalore and in the south of India. But we expect that the instructor working in Delhi or Bihar has the same tempo, has the same
Hmm.
understanding of what a good class is structured like, and has the same rapport with the students as we've seen, happens quite often here.
And so do they go through some kind of training?
The training is quite rigorous. So again, when you speak about education and you speak about an NGO, you're not quite frankly able to offer top dollar. You can't. A lot of these folks, um, some of them have BEds, some of them are just BAs. And we even at one point said, look, we'll take dropouts as well. As
Mm-hmm.
Ramji says, the only degree he's interested in is a BEE, which is a Bachelor of Energy and Enthusiasm. So very early on, Agastya realized that there was no reason to only have a science graduate teaching science. In fact, we found that commerce graduates and arts graduates actually were able to engage with the children in a more exciting way and bring out other aspects of science that maybe a science graduate may not. And so the training that they go through is rigorous because of that, because a lot of them come without sometimes any prior qualification in education.
Mm.
And then if you move up the ranks, you get to be what's called an IMT, an instructor master trainer. And
Okay.
it's quite rigorous. So you have to write a test. You have to then prove that you can consistently maintain the level of quality. And then what you end up doing as an IMT is you go and audit the classes of other,
Mm.
as we call them,
Okay.
ignited instructors.
Right.
And that allows the message to filter across from the management down to the regional heads, down to the IMTs, and finally down to the igniters themselves, so that there is a common message, a common thread, and a common understanding for how this should be done.
And they use these mobile vans to go around to the schools.
Yes. So igniters, so a van would typically have a driver and an igniter.
Okay.
And as I said, they set time with school. So there's a journey plan for each van on a given day. They'll go to this school for 2 hours and then they'll drive across to this school. So I think typically in a day, you might see 2 or 3 schools get visited.
Okay.
And then, of course, the bikes were started because of a very interesting problem that we had with the vans, which
Mm-hmm.
was that in India, unfortunately, the instructor doesn't always want to be the one driving the van. So the
Okay.
instructor would say, "Hey, I'm a teacher. I've got a higher degree of pedigree. I'm not going to drive a." And
Okay.
even when an instructor was willing to drive the van because he said, "Okay, it's going to save 50% of the head count is going to come down if I can just drive myself," he would then come back or she would come back saying the principal is kind of looking around to see where's the instructor because he thinks I'm driving, so I can't be the
Yeah.
one. And so this
Hmm.
very strange cultural kind of
Yeah.
class issue that crept up right at the beginning. And it
Right.
wasn't until the lab on a bike happened
Okay.
that suddenly we realized, wait a minute, the image of a guy riding in on a motorcycle is very different.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're this cool guy coming in, you're the teacher that has a bike, and the kids
Yeah.
are running around you. And it completely takes care and kind of diffuses this strange cultural barrier that we were seeing. And so the lab and a bike, which was actually Tyagarajan, who is Agastya's vice chairman now, but joined as this COO,
Okay.
it was his brainchild, and it was something that came to them much later when they were trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? They in fact had a lab in a box concept. We'd already made the and so Tiago said, listen, just put them on 2 boxes, one on either side of a bike, and send it out, and let's see what happens. And it turned into, I think Agastya won an award for this because it really turned into something quite unique. And it solved the problem of reach. It solved the problem of, as I said, the rate, as we say, the cost of reaching a child,
Right.
and turned into a very fun case study, honestly.
Do the kids in government schools, do they get a chance of coming to the Agastya campus? Because I think that's a very exciting place.
It is. So every day, Agastya has about 600 kids from the surrounding villages
Okay.
and the surrounding government schools. So Agastya
Yeah.
vans will go out. You can see them parked there on the top. They will go out
Ah,
and pick up
right.
these kids from their schools. And so about 600 kids every day are on campus. And again, it's brilliant. If you happen to go there on a weekday, the
Yeah.
buzz it's electric. Everyone is just trying to consume as much as they can because they know that okay, this might be once in 2 months or once a month for them at most. So the campus's location gives that benefit, I suppose, to the surrounding schools. We do have something called a YIL, a Young Instructor Leader Program, wherein
Okay.
Agastya identifies diamonds in the rough, as it were, kids showing remarkable aptitude, great attitudes, a hunger
Hmm.
for learning more. And
Okay.
an igniter might come back saying, we need to give this kid a little more time
Hmm.
to learn because they seem to be really showing a lot of aptitude for science.
Yeah.
And if we can, some of those kids again get invited to campus to spend a few days, and there's great accommodations on campus. It's like staying in a really nice hostel. The food is amazing, and so it's a wonderful experience for them. It really is. And these YILs, as we call them, young instructor leaders, it was again a program started right in the beginning because a group of girls, when Agastya was trying to do its first large fair and found that it was
Hmm.
didn't have enough teachers and couldn't recruit anyone overnight.
Yeah.
And this group of
Right.
girls stepped forward and said, "Why don't you train us? And then
Hmm.
we'll man some of the stalls in the fair." So they spent
Yeah.
3 days training these girls, and it gave them the
Okay.
idea both for peer-to-peer learning and the importance of a child learning from another child. Because not only are you less afraid to ask questions, especially silly questions, but you also form a bond that is kind of interactive. Sometimes the child teaching you might not have the full picture, and then you fill the gaps, and then it just becomes this very uh, you might almost autocatalytic system of each one complementing the other's work. And that also gave Agastya the idea when that happened that there are some kids who we'd like to spend more time with and see if we can't level them up, as it were, because they don't have the access
Right.
to the labs and to the teaching methods that we can give them. And so
Hmm.
what we found over the years is the YILs have a tremendously high college enrollment rate. So almost 98% of YILs
Oh,
end up doing graduation. The Indian average is 22%. So that's the kind of delta you're creating with this kind of intervention. And in fact, in developed countries, it's still only about 75 to about 78%. So you're giving kids a platform, you're giving them um, I guess more than anything else, as we say, we're giving them the confidence to look
hmm.
inward and say, hey, wait a minute, someone is actually looking at me and saying, I'm capable, I can actually do something. And it doesn't matter what they say at home. And this is especially true of the girl children or
Yeah.
what anyone is telling me I can and cannot do. But here's an organization that is clearly thinking that I must be something. And so it gives them that impetus to then say, now I can build on that and
Right.
really work towards building myself out and achieving something.
And is with all this excellent work and the results, is Agastya looking at probably uh, working in sync with the government on any kind of education initiatives, or is there support from there?
Yes, I think one of the first things, in fact, that happened and first things that allowed Agastya to flourish was, in fact, that the government started seeing the benefit of the interventions that Agastya was doing. So the
Yeah.
Karnataka government has been a very strong and staunch supporter for a long time. And other
Hmm.
state governments have likewise seen the value of what Agastya is doing and given
Okay.
tremendous support. So, for example, we never have to worry about space in government schools because there's always some. So, if you want to build a science center, for example, the issue is never space. It is getting the operation costs and the getting the instructor
Yeah.
over there. So that's always readily available. And I think India has always had a culture of education. We're lucky in that sense that no one looks at
Right.
education and says that's not something you need. And what
Mm-hmm.
Agastya is doing is, in a sense, complementing the existing structure and trying
Right.
to add a little more flavor into the daily routine of the kids. And when we started doing it in and around the campus, the feedback was, look, kids seem to be very happy coming to school. There's a
Hmm.
buzz, there's an excitement, enrollment rates have gone up. And
Hmm.
that gave Agastya the confidence initially to say, yes, what we're doing seems to be have, having a very positive impact. And yeah, so we've always had that kind of support, and that's kind of how the foundation has allowed been able to flourish.
Fantastic. Can you take us, Adhirath, through this wonderful campus? It looks so inviting.
So I think we are looking at the new biodiversity center. I may be misquoting it, but I know the building very well because
Right,
I've
right.
been there. And the one thing I can tell you is this tree that you see in the corner, I was told is a Trifala tree. I
Okay.
don't know why I know that, but that's the thing. They
Okay.
tend to grow certain species across Augusta, and then
Yeah.
there's a story behind why it's there and what it's doing.
Yeah.
So if you were to, so this is the library, of course, and the library was built right on top of the
Hmm.
tallest part of the campus. And if you go to
Okay.
the roof of the library, then you basically have a 360 view
Hmm.
and you can see three Indian states from just standing in one point because
Oh,
Gurupalli
wow.
or Kuppam basically means confluence in the local
Yes.
language. because it's
Right.
literally it's where the three borders kind of
Meet. Yeah.
interact. And
Okay.
so when Ramji first stood on this site where the library is today, I think
Mm.
that's what inspired him at that time to say, yes, there will come a time, hopefully, when we can build something here, where we can actually have this beautiful view on all sides. So that's the library. And this here is, of course, the Astronomy Center, and it was
Mm.
inaugurated by Dr. Kalam when he came
Oh,
to
well.
campus in 2012.
Okay. Okay.
And what we wanted to do here was one, of course, is have a suspended model of the solar system. And I think
Okay.
it's still possibly the largest suspended solar system model in the world.
Oh.
And what we also wanted to do was automate it so that if you wanted to say, okay, show me how summer becomes winter, you could actually
Hmm.
pre-program that. And then you see how the
Okay.
planets and the sun and everything kind of moves. And you get a
Okay.
nice uh, understanding of how the
Yeah.
entire thing happens. And of course, they also have videos which are projected on the ceiling uh, on the solar system, on astronomy, and on how the stars and all that other stuff happens. And the lake in the distance is not part of the campus, but
Okay.
it's nice to see that it's quite full. We've been very lucky because this land that you see was never this green
I was
when
just going to ask that. I was going to
yeah.
ask that because the initial pictures show very arid, expanse, and now it's so green.
The greatest testimony to Agastya's methods were that it didn't just decide, right, creativity, curiosity, innovation are going to be taglines, and we're going to sell this. But that it, as I like to say, that they definitely got high on their own supply and saying that if we can imbibe that ethos into what we do, then anyone that passes through Agastya will know that we know what we're talking about. And I
Yeah.
think there's no clearer illustration of that philosophy then and how the campus evolved because they
Yeah.
used every trick in the book that they try and teach the kids, every trick of
Yeah.
creativity, of curiosity, of learning, of innovation, in reviving the land, which was just this barren piece with nothing growing, very gravelly, hard stones, white soil, with very little organic matter. And in the
Yeah.
book, there's a whole chapter about the various steps that were taken in reviving the land. But they had a lot of help from ecologists who came in and studied the environment, studied the landscape, and gave them an idea of, okay, historically, this land would have been home to these kinds of species, these kinds of plants. And that is what you need to re encourage because that will flourish. And so, acacia, for example, was allowed to grow wild all across the campus. So, a lot of that
Okay.
had to be removed because acacia is a very invasive species, at least in
Yeah.
this part of the world. And
Yeah.
so, even today, if you go to campus, you'll see folks that live on campus and that have stayed there for a while will habitually just bend down and pull acacia saplings out of the ground
Mm-hmm.
because they know that we can't allow it to propagate. And on the ecology side, as you can see, the landscape is now lush and it's green. And we've been lucky that the last, I think, 7 or maybe 9 years, I think
Yeah.
2009 or maybe 10 was the last time there was a pretty bad season of no rainfall. And since
Yeah. Yeah.
then, it's been generally quite good. But
Quite
also that
good. Yeah.
Agastya has done a lot of work with regards to building um, percolation tanks, stuff that gets recharged when there's one good rain because the land itself was so loose and
Mm.
there was nothing, there were no plants, no roots to keep the water held to
Yeah.
hold on to the water. And so rains would come and all the water would just wash away, and nothing would stay
Right.
in the soil. And so that
Right.
has been a journey in itself. How do you keep the rain from flowing away, and how do you
Mm.
then use that over the year to keep recharging and to keep giving the groundwater a chance?
Yeah.
And the other side, of course, is the buildings. So we were very lucky early on to have an architect who, rest his soul, passed away recently, but Shahrukh
Yes.
Mistry.
Yeah.
And Shahrukh was, I think, I think his soul is embedded in the campus as much as anyone else's could have been. Because I
Mm.
think he came along and said he was going to, I think, build the first few buildings. I think he waived his charges. He said, we'll just pay for materials. And
Mm.
what ended up happening was he built this wonderful team. And each
Hmm.
time we had a new building that we needed to build, it just
Hmm.
became a sort of competition of audacity. Like, well, what can we build now that outstrips or outdoes what we did last time? And when I
Hmm.
interviewed them for the book,
Okay.
it was so heartwarming just to see how they're like, we fight
Yeah.
internally for the project. You know, if there's a new building coming up, then there's 100% a bidding war going on inside,
Yeah.
here at our company to see who's the one that gets to helm it.
Right.
And so if you look at the buildings, each one has its own story. The auditorium was made in the form of a dung beetle. The
Hmm.
biodiversity, I think one of them is built the way a termite's nest would have been built. The
Okay.
uh, the innovation hub is built like a chameleon. And
Hmm.
so again, we get folks who come on campus and who I think usually plan maybe a day or so on campus. And then invariably at the end of the day, you hear a kind of a gripe that, well, if someone had told me it was going to be like this, then we'd have planned maybe 2 or 3 days. And it's very
Yeah.
unfair because I haven't seen that part of campus and I haven't gone there.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
you're seeing here is what we call the Mulikavanu.
Hmm.
And I wrote about this in the book starts, in fact,
With
with this
this. Yeah.
outline of this. And it used to be three outlines. It was a man, a woman, and a child, and now it's just one human body because space again started getting cannibalized, and it didn't seem that we needed that much. And the idea here was, of course, there was a time when the land had been given to us by the Andhra Pradesh government, but Agastya didn't really have the funds to develop the land at that time. So Ramji was in a state where he needed more time to kind of get funds mobilized and start building and showing some activity on campus. And the government was kind of saying that, listen, if you're not using this, it was a lot of land, it's a 172-acre campus. So if you're not going to use it, then can we just have it back? And so, in a moment of sheer desperation, there was a discussion. Is there anything we can do that's going to show that this land is being used, that it's being utilized? And then one of the folks put his hand up and said, "Look, why can't we make a Mulikavanu? We'll just get white stones. We'll create an outline of a man, a woman, and a child, and we'll start planting herbs at each part of the body pertaining to what that herb does for for the human body. So tulsi, for example, near the head because it's great for headaches, and for haldi again at the joints because it's anti-inflammatory. And so yes, these botanists kind of got together and it was a bit of a project. And at least it gave Agastya that breathing time to say, yes, we're using the land, just give us a little more time and we'll do something. And of course, eventually now what you see is a lot more modern. I mean, it's been paved and it's been, made
Okay.
quite nice.
Yeah.
So it's still a
Hmm.
great spot for visitors to come and just take a stroll around. And it's quite large. So you have this huge outline of a human body that you then get to walk.
Hmm.
And there's different
Yeah.
placards at different places telling you what each herb and what the purpose of each herb is. But when it happened, it was creativity in the face of sheer desperation. And that's why it's a story I think that I really wanted to start the book with.
Yes, it was a wonderful story to read at the start of the book, and then it's so inspiring to continue reading that story, because to imagine that the project was saved by such a brilliant idea and yet such a simple idea.
Yeah.
So tell us about the flora and the fauna of this. It's so beautiful to see creatures like this,
It
uh,
again,
and I'm sure
when
the
you looked
people
at
buzzing.
yeah. So I think in the book we there's a line which I think Balram, one of the earliest employees, or the earliest, I say, employee of Agastya, says that there wasn't enough shade for me to keep a water bottle down. Right?
Hmm.
That's how little green and how few the trees were.
Yeah,
And as I said, when the ecological initiative started, there were a lot of changes that were made. There were um, I think that it was called gentle manipulation, is what he called it. Yellappa Reddy, who was working with the government of Karnataka and saw the campus, and I think he immediately understood what had happened. He could
hmm,
see the journey to where the campus was currently, and so he could then map the journey backwards and say, right, if I want to get it back there, then we just go in reverse and we start doing it. So he
Yeah.
started introducing species of spider, for example, which is very counterintuitive, but what would a spider possibly do? But he said, no, the spiders then trap the insects. And I mean, there's a whole video of him explaining it, obviously a
Yeah.
lot better than I could possibly do.
Okay.
And they used a lot of organic, again, mainly organic methods to prop up, to give nutrients back to the trees that they were planting. Even now, the campus has a lot of almond trees. And the philosophy is, of
Mm-hmm.
course, that badam trees shed their leaves twice a year as opposed to
Okay.
once. And so
Okay.
you get a lot more organic matter for the compost pits,
Right.
right?
Right.
So again, simple things like that, which an ecologist would say, yes, let's do this, let's pull this lever.
Mm.
And one by one, you start noticing at the very literally grassroots level, you
Mm.
start seeing the insects coming back. And the moment you see the insects, you start seeing the lizards coming back and the geckos.
Yeah.
Then the
Yeah.
snakes follow suit. Then you have the birds coming in. And as anyone would tell you who's kind of tried to revive or otherwise do anything in the environmental space, the moment the moment the birds get involved, then you're kind of on a virtuous loop upwards, right? Because
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
bird droppings are excellent for putting nutrients back into the soil.
Right.
They spread the seeds far and wide. In fact, one of the problems we have now is sandalwood is there
Mm-hmm.
on campus, and so
Okay.
we're thinking, and sandalwood doesn't really germinate unless the red sandalwood, especially, unless it's
Okay.
gone through the body of the bird. It has to pass through
Mm.
the bird's digestive system, and so as the birds get more active, you start seeing more saplings coming up. And then now, of course, it's anyone's. There's monkeys, of course, on campus. Peacocks can be heard constantly cooing in the background. Wild boar have been spotted. A leopard was spotted once. Elephants use it as a
Oh.
migratory, path. Sometimes you'll just have a herd passing through. And I don't know if there's any such thing as spiritual energy or anything, but if there is, then you have to understand that the fact that animals look at the campus and say,
Yes.
okay, that's we feel safe passing through this land.
Yeah.
It says a lot about what they've done in terms of bringing Mother Nature back and preserving what there is in a very ethical and kind of humane way. And I think that that's why you see there's a butterfly park on campus, and it is quite remarkable. You go in there, and you're just flooded with these different species of butterfly. And someone has, in fact, written a book on the butterflies of Augusta, and this is why, because we suddenly realized that a lot of this stuff was happening now almost automatically because you've created the environment. Much like you've created the environment for children to learn,
Yeah.
the campus was an environment where the fauna then came back and said, "I think we'd like to settle down and spend some more
Yeah.
time here."
Wonderful organic story of the circle of life, I think. So I'm sure Agastya has been recognized and awarded many times. Would you tell us a few of them?
Well, of course, I think Agastya has. I think the Google. I think the Google Award was one of the big ones that we got for the Tekla bike. I think it was, and I mean, there's a list of them beyond that I put into the book, but aren't coming to me right now. But I think for us, the biggest victories were, in fact, stuff like this.
Hmm.
Folks who understand the importance of education. And that includes Abdul Kalam, that includes Rakesh Junjunwala, who at a very early stage where there's really nothing to show,
Hmm.
um, looked at the vision and said, yes, I see where this is going.
Yeah.
And I'm going to support it, not because there's anything on the ground or anything for you to show me now, but because I can see with your mindset and with the kind of thing that you're trying to do, this is
Hmm.
something that I see becoming quite remarkable. And when
Okay.
Ramji met Abdul Kalam for the first time, there was a similar feedback from him that I'm hearing about what Agastya is doing, and I have to say it's the right stuff. If you can
Hmm.
do this more, and if you can, especially, he was very keen that we do it in Bihar because he really felt strongly for certain pockets of India where he said, I feel children are getting left behind,
Right.
and we cannot let that happen. And so when he won an award, he split the money 4 ways, giving a quarter of the reward to Agastya for
Okay.
starting a program in Bihar. And then
Okay.
he pushed, of course, for a science fair as well in Bihar. And his visit to campus in 2012, and I was there,
Mm.
was it was again, yeah, it was like a rock concert that you couldn't even imagine. I mean, the kids were just screaming. Everyone from
Okay.
everywhere had come, kids, parents,
Yeah.
everybody was there. When he got
Mm.
on stage and he started speaking again, teachers had to really yell at the kids to quieten down because they just could
Yeah.
not contain their excitement.
Yeah.
And it was special. It was remarkable because it was someone who clearly had seen education from the ground up, having himself been from very, very humble beginnings,
Okay.
and was then giving Agastya his seal of approval to say, yes,
Mm.
what I did to reach where I am is the kind of thing that you guys are pushing onto kids who are very much from the background that I was. And so for
Right.
us, that was a huge tick mark, we could say, to say that, yes, I think what we're doing is definitely along the right lines.
Let me just run through a little video here for everyone to see. So I have one last question before I open it out to everybody because I'm sure they have a lot of queries. Agastya has a bold vision to impact 100 million undeserved children and 1 million teachers by 2032. Would you tell us something about that, Adhirath?
What happened was during COVID, we realized that COVID was kind of tailor-made for destroying an organization like Agastya. We're talking about a hands-on science learning program wherein face-to-face interaction is the mode of delivery that we have. And surprisingly, or well, maybe not even surprisingly, but Agastya was resilient enough that it actually came out of COVID much stronger. So even though we shut the programs down temporarily, within a few days, I think, not more than that, instructors were suddenly getting restless in their respective hometowns and had started interacting with each other online and saying that, listen, what can we do to keep things going, right? So they started classes through WhatsApp. They started experimenting with how do you combine digital and hands-on and still have an impact or still instill the same sense of joy and wonder and excitement in the child at the other end. And what happened was kids were they were managing to rustle up one smartphone amongst 10, 15 of them, and they were still engaging with the igniters and the instructors to say, yes, we sitting at home, we don't have anything to do, but it would be great if we could, continue class. And eventually this turned into an app that we call the WeLearn app. And some of the stuff was, of course, rolled back when COVID ended. But what it told Agastya was that digital and physical, or what we call phygital learning, is a hybrid model that we can use very effectively to scale up even further. So while we would love for mobile vans to go everywhere and for bikes to go everywhere and for the instructor to physically go into the classroom and interact with the teachers, students, that would still be the number one method, I think, which gives most access to the child to the kind of learning we want to impart to them. But we use the digital mode to kind of scale up even more and reach more children. And when the dust settled on COVID, we realized that, okay, this could be a game changer in terms of how we reach kids that are even further out and even more difficult to reach. And the number that was brought to light was 100 million. We've reached 25 million kids in the
Yeah.
last 25 years, and
Mm.
there's no reason we can't reach 100 million children by the year 2032. And in fact, when Agastya was at the Clinton Foundation, basically, Agastya was honored over there, and Ramji had gone
Yeah.
there. Uh, they said, no, no, we can't say 100 million. Say 35, say 40 million or 38 million. I think they watered it down. They said
Yeah.
the crowd will think you're joking. But what I learned when I interviewed Agastya folks, staff, instructors, uh, they're completely comfortable with that number. They said, no, we're going to hit it and we're going to hit it comfortably. And when we do hit it, it's going to be its own kind of case study because even now, there's creativity, there is innovative thinking going on in the background in terms of how we improve our reach, in terms of how we improve our rate and our richness. So I always thought that online learning is all never going to be as effective as face to
Yeah.
face. I interviewed someone who said, "Listen, we're teaching physiotherapy to kids, to people on the other side of the world through online.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, think of a more physical and a more, hands-on thing than physio. And if
Yeah.
you can do
Yeah.
that, then it's just a matter of thinking around the problem and devising a creative way of doing it that keeps the child engaged, that keeps them enthusiastic about the topic, but allows you to create a connect even through a digital space."
I mean, I have no doubt that the 100 million is going to happen for sure. So Stan has a very interesting question. He says, what makes you do this internally? What really, really makes you do this? And I'm not asking about what others gain from your initiative. My question is to your inner self.
You mean me personally, or do you mean Agastya,
Uh,
the royal me?
I don't know, Stan, if he's here, but I think maybe it's to you personally.
Personally, again, as I said, I've been personally, okay, I see his message now. Um, Look, I'll be very honest, Ramji Raghavan is my uncle. And I had a front row seat, as it were, in terms of what it was to conceive the idea that was Agastya and what it meant at each stage, both to him as an individual as well as to the impact that he was having. And as I said, some experiences such as entering a classroom, as I said, and seeing that kind of energy that you bring, and
Yeah.
recognizing that okay, I seem to be a part of this. I seem to be contributing to this energy, and say what you will, there is something very precious about a classroom full of kids that are just screaming to learn more. And so I think
Yeah.
that drives to a large extent that motivates to a large extent one to keep coming back and doing this. There is never going to be, I think, I compare it to the desert, right? India and education in general. You
Hmm.
may argue that there may be a more effective way to teach a child, or you may be needing to focus more on content and less on the more holistic or more creative elements of it. But when you have a patch of land that is absolutely parched, any kind of water will be absorbed and taken immediately. And I think what Agastya does is it gives that kind of sustenance. It throws that kind of moisture onto the child effectively, in terms of a child that is really looking to learn more and absorb whatever you can give in terms of teaching. And even a little bit, if you can do
Yeah.
it, you can't but accept that it has a great impact on how the child perceives it.
James says, does Agastya cover schools in Telangana? And can anyone visit the Agastya Center in Kuppam?
Yeah, so Telangana is a big part. In fact, Agastya's offshoot, which is a foundation called Navam, and Navam is trying to take Agastya's models and IP and give it to private schools and help them. There are many government schools again that want to set up their own science centers, so Navam is kind of doing that. And Navam has been using the TSAT network in Telangana to again broadcast digital content directly into the classrooms. So it's a wonderful program. I think that reaches about 3 million kids on its own. And that again has been support from the Telangana government to say, yes, we like what you guys are doing, and we appreciate that this content really resonates with the children. And so we're giving you access to our satellite network so that you can transmit it. And of course, the hands-on and the on-the-ground stuff also happens in and around Andhra Pradesh. The Kuppam, the campus is open to pretty much anyone that wants to go there. That's true. So you can probably, I think, contact through the website and set up a meeting, or I think someone there will be able to guide you as to how to get there. And as I said, it's a very Sattvic kind of a campus. It's fully vegetarian. There's no alcohol allowed. It's kind of stayed very true to the sort of ancient Indian roots of kind of keeping everything very pure. And one of the things that I enjoy when I go there is in fact that I often find myself driving recklessly because I'm like I'm going to miss lunch if I don't get there before 1:30, and
Yeah.
I've got to get there. And when we go there for a couple of days, we all sit during the last meal, the dinner or the lunch or whatever we're having, and we're like, oh gosh, let's make the most of this because it's so delicious and it's good. There's a vibe there that I really cannot put. I've tried to put into words in the book, but to be honest, I don't think I've done justice to the vibe that there is on campus. It's something you need to go and experience, I think, for yourself.
So I think with the paucity of time, I think I'm going to just ask the last two questions, Adhirath. One is from Aparna, which says, can you share another success story of the children? And the second one is curious to know if Agastya is looking for more facilitators from across the country, primarily for online teaching and learning.
Well, we're always looking for more igniters, and one of the things we write about in the book is Agastya hires people less for the role and more for the person. That's always been a philosophy from the beginning. So, as I said, bachelors of energy and enthusiasm is kind of what we look for. So, anyone with that kind of degree can definitely reach out and apply. The first part of your question, could you repeat that? I'm so sorry, it's just escaping me.
Would there be any other success story of the
Oh, yes,
children
sorry,
that you
yes.
would like to share?
We've written about a few of them in the book, and I'm it's tough to see which one is my favorite. I like the one right at the end of the book, which is the story of Monica,
Yeah.
basically because it's a great, uh, it's an amazing comeback story. It's kind of
Yeah.
like someone tried to tell this girl that. So I'll just the story is that Monica was a very weak student and probably was resigned to the fact that she would just be married off once she passed through high school, if even. And her father had pretty much told her as much. And she was one day visited, her school was visited by an Agastya Ignatius, and he was explaining to them, or demonstrating rather, the how the blood test works. And so all the kids were asked to give their fingers, and they were poked, and a little drop of blood was taken, and then it was tested, and then the kids were told your blood group is whatever it was. And we at Agastya call these pinprick moments, right? This girl was suddenly struck by how absolutely interesting and exciting this thing that we honestly take for granted, right? What is a blood test? There's nothing so crazy about it. But she'd never seen anything like this, and she was just blown away by. Can you really do that? Can you take a drop of blood and give me information back about myself? She was fascinated. So she went back to her father and she said, listen, I want to go to college. And her father said, well, no, that's not happening. A, you don't even have the grades. And B, I'm getting you married off because unfortunately that's what he said. And she challenged him and said, well, if I come first in my class, will you let me go to college? And this is why I love the story, because obviously the father thought that that's never going to happen, right? I mean, she's not a
Yeah.
good student.
Yeah.
It's never, there's no way I'm going to lose this bet. So he agreed. And of course, Monica came first. She went to college, and she wrote her story the way she wanted to write it. And I think it gives you, as we call them, pinprick moments.
Yeah.
And what we like to say, I think, in Agastya is, and I used to think this earlier, that we think of education as a transfer of knowledge. And it isn't that at all. In fact, in this day and age, even less so. You don't need to go to school to learn facts anymore. AI is available, Google is available. Information is not at a premium in any way.
Yeah.
What we try and say is, what does the child learn about themselves through the journey of acquiring this knowledge? And I think that is way more important. I would much rather a child follows that journey and reaches the wrong answer, then the child is spoon-fed the right answer at the beginning and then walks around saying, I know all the answers. Because
Yeah.
the child that actually goes through that journey and discovers something probably finds out something more about themselves. And I think that's ultimately what Agastya was trying to do. We started out as a science program, we started out saying STEM. STEM evolved into the arts, it evolved into maths, of course, and it evolved into drama. Now we're doing programs on financial literacy and financial hygiene. And it's eventually came back to this idea of how do we instill caring? How do we instill confidence? And how do we map this child's identity of themselves in a way that makes them feel that there isn't a fixed formula that they need to follow, and if they don't do it, they're not going to get there, right? So in schools in India, we logic and we teach linguistics. Those are the only two things that are actually tested in a true sense. Kinesthetics, if you're good at sports, if you're good at dancing, no one really cares. Spatial intelligence, which I don't have. You as an architect, I think, will appreciate that you probably were a good artist in school and you probably had a great understanding of how space can be utilized, but it wasn't necessarily STEM. It wasn't maths, it wasn't biology, physics, chemistry, any of those things. And someone may write off someone with great spatial intelligence and great capacity to make art and say you're not that smart. So I would rather be a great architect than a mediocre scientist. And a lot of kids, unfortunately, get told very early on that you're probably not going to amount to anything because they just haven't understood how many different facets there are to a child's intellect and to what a child can potentially do when they are able to harness and understand their own intellect. And I think that is the crux of what Agastya has done and continues to do, which is instilling in children a sense of identity and allowing them to think through their circumstance rather than just stay resigned and say, okay, this is what it is.
Thank you for this very absorbing 1 hour, Adhirath. I know that Agastya has done wonderful work in igniting the joy of learning in these children. And I'm sure all of us are with you in spirit that Agastya, in spirit with also the teachers, that Agastya will reach that 100 million mark for sure. And it is only going to benefit all the children who are learning so much for you. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us. I'm sure your throat is parched because I made you talk so much. But the
I've been
story,
hydrating. It's fine. Thank you.
but the story is so long and so wonderful that I think we could have spent a lot more time. But considering it's past 6 o'clock, I thank you again very much. I thank all of you for being here. Please check out Adhirath's book on Amazon, The Moving of Mountains, and do go to the Agastya website to see how you can engage with them and to also check out their fascinating journey. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening. Thanks, Adhirath, again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.